let's shake it up a little bit this morning. Raise your hand if you work for a utility. Raise your hand if you work for a service provider that engages and supports the utilities. Raise your hand if you support consumers or at-home electronics and the receiving end of information. And how many of you are on the G team, the government team? A good number of you. That's a good mix. And I got my brother George Arnold in the front. That makes me happy. I am excited about talking to the mix of you because today I want to not only remind us of the framework we've worked on to address moving forward in the smart grid, but I want to have a more specific challenge or tasking of us, which I'll get to at the end of my remarks. But my hope and my theme is that when you leave the session today and you just I walk off the stage, there's a sense that we're going to do something specifically together, and I'm going to talk about that at the end. Realizing, Anto, I don't have the little clicker, so if you just do next slide. If I do, I would like to see where I make it happen. On to the next slide. Okay. Now, it is very important to understand the context with which we're having this discussion in Washington. The President addressed a joint session of Congress to put Americans back to work and to ensure that we've increased the wealth for all Americans that are employed. The combination of the two is what we're focused on under the American Jobs Act. And I wanted to highlight more broadly the innovation features that are associated with the American Jobs Act. First and foremost, the President called for unique strategies to boost access to capital for high-growth companies. Some of these are literally removing bottlenecks. The President called for us to collaborate with the Securities and Exchange Commission in evaluating how we can allow for areas like crowdfunding. There's actually a hearing on the Hill this morning on the issue. How we can encourage more reforms within the Sarbanes-Oxley framework to ensure high-growth companies can access capital markets and the like. Second, we want to turn job seekers to job creators. The President said, as we modernize our unemployment system, and he spoke about a number of reforms, he highlighted one in particular that perhaps some of you in this room might take advantage of. He literally challenged us to say, if you're applying for unemployment benefits, in today's environment, you apply and you actually secure, you have to prove that you're looking for a job, and it's a job-seeking platform. But there are some states that have experimented with a new model of self-employment assistance, basically saying, I would like to make a job as much as I would like to seek a job, and allowing the unemployment system to continue to reimburse me or to support me during my transition as I move from what was a previously employed position to starting up my own business. The President asked us to scale the self-employment assistance option to every state in the country. Third, and we spoke about this, I've been at GridWeek and a number of other smart grid forums over the past year and a half, the President's State of the Union message emphasizing our ability to out-innovate, out-educate, and out-build our economic competitors around the world is very much at the heart of our wireless initiative. The President unveiled a policy vision. The Senate Commerce Committee passed in a bipartisan basis Senate Bill 911, 21 votes in favor, 4 in opposition, a majority of Democrats and a majority of Republicans back in June, to unleash a mobile broadband revolution. And I think you had a discussion earlier in the week to ensure that our first responders have access to the spectrum that they need to make sure that our families are safe and secure. The President also called for investments in building out that public safety broadband network, not just to provide them access to spectrum, which is referred to as the D block, but to make the investments necessary to build out a 4G network for first responders. And a great healthy discussion in the smart grid is how might our utility infrastructure link up or participate in this effort, a very healthy and vibrant discussion indeed. Fourth, the President asked us to modernize our nation's schools and our next generation air traffic control system. Again, in the spirit of when we're rebuilding America, we're going to rebuild it in a smarter way. When he called on our modernization of schools, he spoke of internet-ready classrooms and ensuring we have science labs and other infrastructure to ensure we can compete in the 21st century. And then last but not least, he gave me a homework assignment. He said, Aneesh, in the next 90 days, I want you and the Chief Information Officer to stand up a simple web-based platform that would allow small businesses to access government resources in a more, what I would call simple customer service, customer-friendly way. We've got over 100 government programs emphasizing support for entrepreneurs and startups, and it's very confusing, but we heard around the country, it's really hard to navigate these various programs. I can imagine it's not that dissimilar to what you might find in smart grid-related activities. But the bottom line is we have a very important task, and that is to make sure that America is more competitive for the long haul, and that is going to require all of us to up our game, as the President alluded to. Next slide. Part of jobs in the smart grid and in clean energy writ large is acknowledging that if Americans invent these products and services, we can export them around the world. You can, you can't read the raw numbers probably from the graphic, but you could see it's moving in the right direction. That is data through 2009 on how much we've been exporting in renewable energy in particular. In fact, we have a dedicated initiative in the Commerce Department to power up our green energy exports. And you are all welcome to participate. If you visit export.gov, you can engage and be a part of the community to tap into the resources that are at your disposal. Now, by the way, I wanted to highlight a couple of examples because you don't have to be a multi-billion-dollar corporation to access these support services to help you sell your products and services abroad. I want to just highlight two examples of smaller companies, growing companies, that are making their way delivering products and services. Lighting Sciences Group, partnering with an Indian company called Dixon to develop and to scale a $15 60-watt equivalent LED bulb for the Indian market. In a sense, it's an example of what we're seeing all around the world, which is these collaborations forming between international organizations, U.S. entrepreneurial thought leadership, and in the combination of these two, bringing together products and services that can tap into this very, very fast-growing global market. And in addition to the great work that Lighting Sciences had announced in India, Tendril had announced earlier this summer a partnership with Australia's Origin Energy to bring their next-generation consumer engagement platform to market. What's important about these stories is that as I look over the next decade, we know for certain there will be information technology products and services that fuel, whether it be a smart chip on a light bulb or consumer access to energy data or anything in between. We know this will happen. We know this will happen in the economy. The challenge is, will we invent, productize, and scale those services or products in the United States to benefit our economy and export them around the world? Or will they take hold in other markets where the infrastructure is more accommodating to identify promising ideas, test and validate that they achieve results, and scaling up the best and the brightest of those options? Will we be net importers or net exporters of these smart grid-derived, smart grid-related products and services? I contend to you that if we get this smart grid vision right, working together, we can lead the world in the development of, the fostering of, the ideas that will prove this thesis out in the years to come. By the way, a little shout out. Can I see the delegation from India here on a trade mission to explore these very issues? Where's the Indian team? Stand up, Indian team. Hey, beeline to these guys and pitch them your best ideas. Are you ready? Yes, you are. Next slide. I want to remind all of us that in the summer months, in June, Secretaries Chu, Secretary Locke under his leadership in the Commerce Department, Secretary Vilsack in his leadership at the Agricultural Department, came together to announce the White House's strategy to modernize our nation's electricity grid. And you have heard the story, you've hopefully read the material. Raise your hand if you've read our strategy paper. Please, please, hands up, please, please. Visit smartgrid.gov and make sure you have access to it. It has 4 very important principles. The first of those principles is that we want to enable cost-effective investments. Okay? We acknowledge and appreciate and fully respect the authorities that are all around our governance model. We have certain areas where the federal government is investing and convening around standards. We have certain areas where our state regulators are making the judgments about what are or are not cost-effective investments. We've got boots on the ground in local communities about all range of zoning issues and the like. It is important for us to acknowledge that this lowercase g collaborative approach to government swims in the right direction so that we can achieve that vision that you've been talking about all week. And as an example, we're going to do our part. We will ensure that the early insights from the Recovery Act investments identify those promising practices, provide the evidence base that they work, and to encourage their scaling by sharing that knowledge with all the stakeholders across the ecosystem. We're also going to make all the resources available that are available from other activities that are taking hold through smartgrid.gov, so that it's not just an ARRA-focused activity, but it's about what we're learning in ag and other areas. I will point out, by the way, this strategy has some early evidence of success. For those of you from California or familiar with the California's Utility Commission rule, as they have moved forward on encouraging the 3 utilities in California to adopt common standardized approaches to ensure consumer access to energy data, it specifically referenced the SGIP, the Smart Grid Interoperability Panel, where our dear friend and colleague George Arnold has played a phenomenally important leadership and convening role. So we're thankful that the California PUC referenced the SGIP process, and we're hopeful that that indicates this collaborative model that has been at the center of the White House's strategy from day one. Next slide. It's also about unlocking the potential of innovation in this market. And we see 2 primary areas where we can help catalyze such innovation. One, ARPA-E has made investments and is in the midst of a solicitation as we speak, looking at ways we can modernize the grid. I happen to be a Virginian, so I celebrate the fact that one of their grant recipients was Gene Sick, I probably pronounced that wrong, that is looking to shrink the transformer from 8,000 pounds to basically the size and weight of a suitcase, okay? And to include more sophisticated electronics in the transformer itself. So shrink it and make it smarter. And you see that ARPA-E is investing in this area. And again, given ARPA-E's track record, we've already seen in ARPA-E's portfolio private capital piling in on top of evidence-based successes in the ARPA-E portfolio. We have high confidence that the professional approach to grant making in ARPA-E is going to identify these promising practices, accelerate their commercialization, and in collaboration with the private sector, scale them up. And as I referenced earlier, it's about the great work that George is doing on standards. We've got PAP 10 on its way and moving. We've got a group of folks engaged in taking PAP 10 in a way that makes it more standardized than how we implement PAP 10. And you'll see much more activity in this area. I'll comment on that momentarily. But if you standardize the model when information flows, you open up, as the lesson of the internet has shown, if anything, standardization opens up new market opportunities, reduces friction, and creates what I would call much more shots on goal, which is what we want to see in this environment, where we don't quite know how the individual consumer is going to behave in a new information-empowered world. We don't have a single bullet for solving this problem. We're going to see lots of shots on goal, and we want to encourage that, and standardization is an important tool in the toolkit. Third, it is extremely important, next slide, that we move on to the issue of cybersecurity in the grid. Now, many of you have asked and have engaged on cybersecurity issues that are specific and unique to the smart grid. I might point out the fact that, yes, we referenced those issues, but we have harmonized that approach with a broader vision for cybersecurity. And in May of this past year, my colleague Howard Schmidt, the President's Cybersecurity Coordinator, unveiled a legislative package. And you can see this at whitehouse.gov/cybersecurity, a legislative package that convenes around some basic principles. Number one, enabling voluntary technical assistance and information sharing between the Departments of Homeland Security and the private sector. So today, if there's information that we have access to that would be useful for the utility sector and the ecosystem writ large, we want the legal authority to engage in voluntary information sharing. We think that's really important. We also emphasize the importance of transparency to bring market forces to bear, especially in areas of critical infrastructure. So we want folks to be able to describe the degree to which they find themselves their outcomes and performance measures, if you will, on cybersecurity, so that there is that market force, so that you know where your challenges are and where your opportunities might be to improve, signaling to the private market where products and services might address and close the gaps. And I want to make an additional observation. We often reference cybersecurity. We have to talk about cybersecurity and privacy in much the same way. We have, separate from the cybersecurity framework, also published a commitment to establish an online consumer bill of rights. And we have spoken of this in the context of commercial data privacy, and the administration has called on basically a public-private partnership approach where we have a framework that calls on a strengthened online privacy posture, but allows the private sector to voluntarily congregate, engage on those rules of the road, and then have the industry consensus enforceable by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. So this is a very important part of the smart grid. Fourth and final pillar. Next slide. We want to make sure that we can empower consumers and enable better decision making. In the time since we rolled out the smart grid white paper, we have now launched energy.data.gov. So there's memos, white papers, documents, words. And for the techies in the room, there's code and there's data. Yes, we've published the white paper on smart grid, and we've got standards, documents. But now we've launched a simple platform called energy.data.gov where you can tap into an ever-growing array of data sets, challenges and prizes and contests, and opportunities on codeathons and hackathons to get in the game, to tinker and play and experiment. And energy.data.gov is an important tool for us moving forward because it's going to be where we will bring together the developer community and all the resources that we have. And we're starting to see these empowerment use cases. In fact, the Recovery and Reinvestment Act had specific grants to Reliant and Centerpoint and NSTAR where they effectively have provided a developer platform for smart grid applications. And we're very pleased that these contests and these challenges have already led to new products and services that build on top of information sets, just as we've envisioned when we rolled out the white paper several months back. But I want to end with a final observation, and that's the next slide. It is one thing for me to come to you, as I have several times in the past, to tell you a vision. It is quite another to challenge you to get moving in the spirit of the internet. The spirit of the internet is rough consensus and running code. Bottom-up change. Let's get moving. Nothing will be perfect on day one, but we try and we iterate. I want to borrow a page from our healthcare experience to begin what I will end with, which is this direct and specific challenge for all of you. In August of 2010, our president went to the Disabled Veterans of America and gave a speech to discuss the end of the combat mission in Iraq. But in that speech, the president specifically challenged our administration, and he told veterans on that day that this fall, they will be able to download, with the click of a simple blue button, all of the personal health care data that we have on them, that is their data, but happens to be housed, in this case, in the veterans' My Healthy Vet application. A simple idea. In the past, you could log on to My Healthy Vet and see your data. And you might look at it and say, that's interesting, but we'd never allowed you to take your data with you. So 90 days after the president issued this challenge, and I might add, by the way, one of the loudest applause lines in the speech when he had a bigger message on the combat mission in Iraq. On October 7th, the VA, in startup fashion, rolled out a very simple text file where today's personal health record in the VA, all it had was your prescription history. It didn't have your brain scan or anything fancy like that. It just had your prescription history. And so they went live with prescription history data, and wouldn't you know it, 400,000 veterans, and now active duty military and Medicare beneficiaries have downloaded using Blue Button. On Monday of this past week, seeing the momentum, the grassroots momentum, the fact that the American people are asking for this loud and clear, the private sector stepped up to the plate. And at an event with Secretary Sebelius, the CEOs of Aetna and United Health Insurance, which collectively have 15 million Americans that have personal health records in their private sector platforms, announced that they would support the Blue Button specification. And not to be outdone, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation stood up bluebuttondata.org to allow private companies, big and small, to access the text file or the simple spec so that they too can join the bandwagon. By the end of the next year, you mark my words, the overwhelming majority of data holders in the healthcare ecosystem will have adopted the Blue Button. Not because there was a government law mandating it, not because there was some big fat subsidy program you could apply for to subsidize the rollout of it, but because it was just a simple idea that scaled because it worked. It scaled because it worked. Now, before I get to the last slide, I just want to make a personal observation. I happen to live in a community where in my home for the last 8 months, I have a smart meter. I have 0 additional data on my energy consumption as before that device was installed. 0. My life has not changed a lick. I am very confident our utility is making their lives more efficient, using it in the back office and the operational aspects. But from an information flow, I got nada. How many Americans today, in the spirit of Blue Button, have the technical capacity to access their own energy data? Not to just look at it on a screen as a bunch of numbers, but to download it. In the case of healthcare, there are dozens of companies that have announced, upload your Blue Button data with us, and we'll connect you to hundreds of applications to keep you healthier, make sure you don't take drug interactions, and other issues that we hadn't even thought about. So I end with the next slide. It is high time that we, in the energy sector, get moving on the design of our own green button. A challenge for us to establish in an open collaborative model the ability to empower our consumers. And we have the raw material. We've got PAP 10, we've got, in the case of California, regulatory impetus. We have others that are beginning to experiment in this regard. Let's come together and form a virtual startup so that we can safely and securely provide customers electronic access to their energy information, thereby supporting the continuing development of innovative new products and services in the energy sector. We'll harness the SGIP standards. We'll pursue this in an open, collaborative manner. We'll do this in a multi-stakeholder way. We'll adopt the principles of my good friend Eric Ries in the Lean Startup, and we'll ensure that this is easy to use. I'm looking at you, brother man, and I'm looking at all of you. Let's come together. We can come together in a virtual startup to achieve the results that we're starting to see in other sectors. If you are interested, I have directed my staffer, Nick Sinai, good-looking Nick Sinai, to get your names and interests so that we can start to form this open collaborative effort. Let's get moving. The American people deserve it. Our innovation ecosystem is excited about the prospects, and we will get it done. Thank you so much for your time.